I'm Stephen O'Grady from Red Monk, and this is...
Hey, I'm Mike Shapiro from Sun System.
So I think we're here to recap the afternoon of open storage and so on. So Mike, why don't you tell us what Fishworks is and what it's all about?
Well, Fishworks is basically, as an engineering team inside of Sun, and we've been locked away for the past couple years, basically building Sun's new integrated storage product line. So we're going to have some new storage products that are going to basically feature, all the features that people are used to in enterprise storage products like SIFs and NFS and iSCSI, a really cool management interface, and then some things that are really unique in the market. In particular, our observability technology, analytics, and some really interesting things with flash memory, which we call the hybrid pool.
So the hybrid pool features a couple of different pieces in terms of high density, lower speed drives,
that's right,
flash memory, and
the whole idea is that typically the way people build performance in storage systems is with a lot of memory or cache and a lot of really fast disk drives, 15,000 RPM disk drives, and those are really expensive and really power hungry. So the thing that's different about the hybrid pool is that we've gone into ZFS, which is our core data asset, and added features specifically for flash, where we have read-optimized flash devices, write-optimized flash devices to deliver performance, and then really cheap, really slow SATA devices, really low-power SATA devices to deliver raw capacity. And so that means that you have all the performance you need, but the unit of capacity is the lowest power and the lowest cost it can be. And so the overall system delivers better performance, lower dollars per gig, lower dollars per IOP, lower watts per IOP as well, and that's pretty cool, we think.
Well, and one of the questions I think was answered today, which I found personally interesting, was so dtrace obviously offers you the ability to observe processes at a very granular level in terms of systems it's running on. And applied to storage, what are the kinds of questions that it can answer?
Well, that's what's really amazing is we've taken that ability to instrument any part of the system with dtrace that we have, and we've created a visual interface for that answers those storage questions. And so some examples are you can look at not only CPU and memory, but the actual storage protocols. You can ask questions like, of the different protocols I'm serving, which one is consuming the most of my bandwidth, the most percentage of my bandwidth, or which SIFs clients, which Windows clients are actually hot right now, which files are hot. Or you can even ask more advanced questions that are just really unheard of in the storage space, like, what's the average latency of an NFS-v4 read to this file? Or what's a histogram of the offsets of files that I'm accessing? So you can actually watch your database do a table scan by watching the stair step of the offsets of the files it's asking. And so this, whether it's debugging a performance problem or asking a capacity planning question like, would I benefit from more memory, more cache, or doing things out in the clients like, which clients are ruining my storage system right now? And that's a question that we find people are really struggling with, and I'm sure some of the customers you talk to as well in these deployments. And this is giving them just unprecedented insight into those things, but they don't really have to know anything about the implementation because we've put a really easy interface on top of it.
Well, and that's actually one of the questions that I think a lot of people have is that the technologies that are involved here, are they entirely unique? In other words, could people wire this together themselves? Or is the combination of technology something that's really something they couldn't do on their own?
I think what we've tried to do is have a little bit of both in that where we have a set of open components in the market, and those are things that really speak to developers. Developers can take Open Solaris, developers can take ZFS, etc. Then at the same time, we have our branded integrated products where we put all that stuff together, and that's where you get the maximum value in terms of the integration, performance, scale, density, all those things that you'd want to have. And those are unique when compared to other integrated storage products. So we're hoping that we can engage developers and be open. At the same time, if you just want to buy a NAS brick, we have that for you at very compelling value. So I think one question that I have for you is, because you're talking to a lot of companies, both small companies and large companies, is what problems are people having? Because we talk to customers all the time, but you have a very different view, not being a vendor in terms of independently looking at where are people struggling today? Where are they not well served by products that are in the market today?
Well, I think you've touched on many of the points, right? In other words, the costs are generally way too high, particularly when they're compared to, one of the points that came up today was the differentiation between, different types of disk. Right, so people are generally paying premiums for disk hardware and not necessarily seeing the returns in terms of quality and reliability and so on. So, the old saying still holds in terms of, there are two types of disks, a disk that has failed and a disk that is about to fail. So customers are of all types. Whether we're talking startups that are doing video and very heavy storage intensive purposes, or large established firms that have much more computationally intense enterprise type needs.
Right.
Still have some very serious questions in terms of, all right, how do I assemble a storage infrastructure that's reliable but also cost effective?
Right.
Without spending tons and tons of money. And that's certainly one of the customers that we heard from today at the event, and I've heard it time and time again, is the initial entry point has to be relatively affordable. Right? And that's one of the things that open source software has typically afforded startups. They don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars from the outset to assemble an infrastructure, because they can acquire different pieces either for free or at a relatively reasonable cost compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago when the cost of the infrastructure was very high and entirely proprietary.
Right.
So cost is a big one. But then also, I think we do hear a lot of the black box type of problem, right? Which is something that dtrace technology has been applied to in the past. The observability of some of these systems in terms of, okay, we have an issue. Where is it? What file? How?
And
what's causing it?
In the storage infrastructure, I think we hear that particularly because you got people are literally trying to debug across the compute infrastructure, the network infrastructure, and the storage infrastructure.
Exactly.
And they have, very primitive tools. Where do you start? Or you just end up with people saying, well, it's not the network.
Yes.
But that's all I know. And I can't really say any more than that. And that actually brings up another question I have, because I think, one of the things you have to do as an analyst is look at, where are we going? How are these things changing? And, one of the things that we see in terms of the different kinds of customers you talk to is, in very traditional large customers, I sort of think of segments of, there are the people who manage operating systems and boxes.
Right.
There are the people who write applications, the people who manage switches and networks,
sure.
and then the sort of traditional storage people.
Yep.
In a lot of the smaller companies you deal with, those boundaries don't really exist. One future question I have for you is, do you think that will continue to be? In other words, as some of these companies grow larger, do you think they sediment internally into those same structures, or does that?
I actually don't.
Do these new companies continue to be different?
No. I think the trend that we're seeing certainly in the marketplace is, with the advent of cloud computing, a lot of the typical scaling tasks that startups have struggled with essentially are being outsourced to cloud providers. Right. So rather than some of these very small companies that don't necessarily have the resources, and don't really want to go out and acquire them, at the cost that they command, will essentially make that somebody else's problem. Right. So that's one of the primary advantages to cloud computing, and to that approach is that for many of them, it obviously depends on the provider that you choose. Amazon, for example, a lot of scaling is still on you. You still need to know how to wire together the individual pieces. But something like Google App Engine, basically your implementation is all that you need to be concerned about. The scaling is now somebody else's problem. And ultimately, I think that's the trend that we'll see. So rather than a lot of these startups, have to go through the same pains of recreating individual resourcing departments and divisions to handle all of these separate tasks, which frankly are very different and require different skill sets, different investments, different certifications, different hardware experience, and so on. I think increasingly they'll seek to outsource that wherever they can, because the return in terms of investing in the skills to manage them effectively simply isn't worth it over time. You can't command the same economies of scale that larger players can.
And I think one more follow-up to that is, I think one thing that goes along with that is the sort of another kind of network effect, which is that the one of the things we're seeing is that once again, it's sort of as the different parts of the architecture vary in speeds, is that the networks are getting so fast that actually the notion of having storage over the network, or even accessing the other guy's DRAM and or storage might be significantly faster over the network than, and more cost effective than having that be locally resident in the machine.
Absolutely.
And that's going to drive that storage as a service economy that you were talking about.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We were talking earlier about how economics can change, and certainly I think also there are technical conditions that can change. All right, so if we think of, for example, software as a service, 5, 10, 15 years ago, that was a less viable proposition simply because on dial-up, the performance of those applications is abysmal.
Right.
Once you move to a broadband, majority environment, that essentially the viability of that application structure changes dramatically. And I think we'll see very much the same thing in terms of sort of quote-unquote services type infrastructures that are created around storage, in the sense that, yes, there'll still be some very, very performance-intensive tasks that you'll want to perform in-house and locally, but I think we'll see an increasing volume of the workloads shift off-site, simply because it ultimately becomes more economical for somebody else to manage your implementation rather than you.
And, you know, and I think also another part of that, just even for people who just have a lab or data center, is the cost per port of 10 gigabit networking or InfiniBand going down dramatically per port.
Yes.
Just really changing that.
Well,
I think
and flash memory as well.
And flash memory, and that's, I think, a lot of things we're trying to do is with those commodity architectures with fastest price performance, with fastest cores, is we can actually drive multiple ports of 10 gigabit or InfiniBand or have switches of that, and that's going to allow people to really take advantage of that. So I got one more futures question for you.
Okay.
Red Sox all the way this year?
If the bullpen straightens themselves out,
It's all about the bullpen.
It's all about the bullpen. We need more from